Today we will be working on our border blocks. There are 4 border blocks all together. I will be working on the border corner block. The pieces on the side are on a diagonal. Border block A and AM, they're straight up and down. And then there's a border block B where there's 4 simple stitch and flip pieces of fabric. But we will be working on file BC, which is the corner. The fabrics you will need will be a triangle of fabric 1, a strip of fabric 3. You will need either a square of fabric 3 for your applique, or you will have your pre-cut pieces of fabric 3 from your Amish Flower Power. You will need a strip of fabric 4. You will need a strip of fabric 5. And for the applique, you will either use a square of fabric 5, or again from Amish Flower Power, you will use your pre-cut piece of fabric 5. You will need a strip of fabric 6, and you will also need your backing fabric. Here we have the optional wool batting, and we're ready to get started. The threads you will need will be thread B, thread C, thread F with a bobbin, and you will also need your water-soluble thread. If you've opted to use the wool batting, that will be step 2. I've already stitched step 1 onto my battleizer. And step 2 will be the optional wool batting. If you're not going to use the wool batting, you can go ahead and skip step 2. So go ahead and put your water-soluble thread in the needle and stitch step 2. This is what step 2 looks like after I've zigzagged my wool batting to my battleizer. If you're not using wool batting, like we said before, you can go ahead and skip step 2 as well as step 3. I'm using wool batting, so I'm going to continue with step 3. I'm going to keep water-soluble thread in the needle, and the machine will re-stitch the placement lines for all of your fabrics onto step 3. If you haven't done so already, raise the height of your presser foot as much as you possibly can to allow the foot to clear the batting. So now we're ready to stitch step 4. In step 4, you'll continue with water-soluble thread. You will place fabric 6 over this area right here. You're going to make sure you extend at least a 1/4 inch above and outside of both of those placement lines, and let the machine stitch the tack down. And then we'll be back for the next step. So here's my tack down from step number 4. And I'm going to go ahead and trim, leaving a 1/2 inch along the outside edge. And the other 2 edges look fine. So it's time to switch out my thread from water-soluble to a neutral thread. And then we will place fabric 4 right side to fabric 6. We're going to make sure we extend at least a 1/4 inch past that line there and raw edges even, and we'll let the machine stitch the seam. Here's my seam from step number 5. So for step number 6, we'll flip our fabric right side up, smooth it out. We'll continue with the same thread, and the machine will tack down fabric 4. So here's my tack down from step number 6. It's time to trim it up. I'll trim the edge, leaving about a 1/2 inch on the outside of the block. And this is a little long, so I'm going to go ahead and trim that, leaving about a scant 1/4 inch. In step 7 is next. For step 7, we will take fabric 3 and place it right sides together with our raw edges even. I've got a little bit close on the last fabric, so I'm going to go a little bit higher on this one, and we'll let the machine stitch the seam using the same thread. Step 8 is to flip fabric 3 right side up, smooth it out, and stitch the tack down. So here's a look at our tack down stitches. I have a little bit more fabric here on my seam allowance than I'd like, so I'm going to go ahead and trim that up to a scant 1/4 inch. Step 9 is next, and for step 9 we will take our strip of fabric 6, place it right side to fabric 3, and let the machine stitch the seam. Next step, number 10, is to flip fabric 6 right side up, smooth it out, and stitch the tack down. So here's my completed step 10. I'm going to go ahead and trim away my excess fabric, leaving at least a 1/2 inch on the outside edge. And I have a little bit more in my seam allowance on fabric 6 than I'd like. So I'm going to go ahead and trim that up, leaving about a scant 1/4 inch. Step 11 is next, and we will take another strip of fabric 4 and place it right side to fabric 6 with our raw edges even and stitch the seam. Step 12 will be to flip fabric 4 right side up, smooth it out, and stitch the tack down. So here's my last tack down, and we're going to give it a trim, leaving a 1/2 inch on the outside edge. My seam allowance is a little bit large, so I'm going to trim that down as well, leaving a scant 1/4 inch. And for step 13, we will take a strip of fabric 5, place it right side to fabric 4, and stitch the seam. For step 14, we will flip fabric 6 right side up and smooth it out. We will change our thread to water-soluble thread in the needle only, and the machine will stitch a tack down around the entire pieced area. So I'm ready for step 15. I'm going to change my water-soluble thread out to a neutral thread, and then I will take my triangle of fabric 1, place it right side to my pieced area, and let the machine stitch the seam. So after my seam is stitched from step 15, I flip fabric 1 right side up and smooth it out. I'm going to switch my needle thread only out to a water soluble so the machine can tack down fabric 1. As you're tacking this down, it's important to keep this fabric nice and smooth and a little bit on the taut side so your quilting will line up later. So here's a look at the block after I've tacked down fabric section 1. For step 17, we will place thread C in the needle only, and the machine will stitch a placement stitch for our 2 appliques. Here's our placement stitches from the last step. So for step 18, you will take your square of fabric 3 and place it in the upper left corner over the placement stitch for the applique. Using the same thread, you'll go ahead and tack down your square of fabric 3, and then you'll trim it very close for your applique stitch later. For step 19, you'll take your square of fabric 5, same thing, you'll go ahead and tack it down and then trim it. I'm using the pre-cuts, so I'm going to skip step 18 and 19 and go directly to step 20, and I'll take my pre-cut pieces, I'll spray a little temporary spray adhesive on the back, and I'll place them where they need to be, and we'll go ahead and stitch out step 20. So I'm ready to place my appliques for step 20. I've gone ahead and sprayed the back of my appliques with a little bit of temporary spray adhesive to hold them in place. So I like to place my appliques standing up, looking directly over my hoop. And I place them so that I'm careful not to let any of the placement stitches show past your applique, because if your placement stitches show, you will probably miss the edge of your applique. So that's why standing up and looking directly down over it is the best way to place them. So I'll place both my applique pieces. I'm going to continue on with thread C, and step 20 thread C will stitch kind of an open zigzag stitch to hold down my applique pieces. So here's what our applique pieces look like after we've tacked them down from step 20. For step 21, we will continue with thread C, and we will go ahead and stitch the satin stitch around both applique pieces. For step 22, we will change to thread B in the needle only, and we will stitch the decorative stitch over the top of the satin stitch. So here's a peek at our decorative stitches we just did on our last step. For step 23, it's time to place the back on. So I will go ahead and flip my hoop over, place my backing fabric over the back of the hoop, switch out to water-soluble thread, and go ahead and baste the back on. Final step 24 for this block, and we will go ahead and change our thread F out in the needle and the bobbin. The machine is going to go ahead and stitch the quilting. So at this point, it's a good idea to turn off your automatic thread cutter, and we'll stitch quilting around the appliques and circle quilting in the piece sections. Another tip for you: when you begin your quilting, anytime after your quilt back is on, you want to go ahead and draw your bobbin thread up to the top by using your needle up and down. This quilting starts in the middle of the block, so it's especially important here. So you draw your bobbin thread up, hold on to both threads, let the machine start, and then stop it after a few stitches, and then you can go ahead and cut off your top and bobbin threads and continue on. So here's a look at our completed block with all the quilting finished. So now we are ready to go ahead and trim it. On page 7 of your instructions for your border blocks, it'll show you an area marked in red for your border blocks A and AM. And on page 14 of your instructions, it'll show you for border blocks BC and BB the same red area. The red means you're going to be cutting through all layers, through your top, your back, and your battleizer, because that's where the binding is going to go. So you're not going to be using the metal edge of your trimmer at this point. So you'll take your trimmer by George, you'll turn it over to the ruler side, find your 1/4 inch mark, and you will trim 1/4 inch through all layers of your block, the top, the batting, and the back, on all the areas marked in red. And again, this is where the binding is going to go, so we don't want to trim off the backing and the battleizer. On the other two sides of your corner block, you're going to continue using the trimmer by George, and this time you will pull back the top layer and shimmy the metal edge up to the basting line, and you will trim off the battleizer and the backing. So you'll do that on the other two sides. So this is the area not marked in red on your instructions. And then after your battleizer and your backing's gone, you'll turn your trimmer over again and align the basting line with the 1/4 inch line on the ruler. And you'll be trimming off just your top layer. So two edges of this block are trimmed. The batting and the backing is off on the white section, and then on the piece section, you've got all the layers in there for your binding.